Ticklish business any way you look at it. Come on, we'll stick together.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ticklish Business. I'm Kristen, joined as always by Emily. Emily, how are you?
I'm so well. Excited to be talking about this one today.
Probably you've listened to Taylor Swift's new album, The Tortured Poets Department. I keep wanting to call it a million different things because I'm just used to her titles being one word. Of course, because she has a song called Clara Bow, we thought it was only appropriate for us to blend our love of Taylor with our love of old Hollywood and do an all Clara Bow episode. To help us, we have a Clara Bow expert, author of the book Clara Bow, Runnin Wild, author David Stenn. David, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you for inviting me, Kristen and Emily.
Thank you so much. I'm excited for us to get to talking about Clara Bow. But before we do that, we'd like to remind everyone that if you haven't checked out our Patreon at patreon.com/ticklishbiz, you should. We do all sorts of additional bonus pods, including doubled features looking at remakes and based on a true podcast looking at biopics and true crime. We most recently did our episode on Mommy Dearest. So if you've ever wanted to hear us talk about Joan Crawford, Faye Dunaway, and or hear me imitate both of those people, you should go over and support us and give it a listen. We also do our series, but have you read the series looking at literary adaptations? And we give out regular care packages of movies, stickers, tote bags, and let you guest on an episode. It starts at just $1 a month at patreon.com/ticklishbiz. And don't forget that I have my book, but have you read the book 52 Literary Gems that inspired our favorite movies? And Emily has her Girl Friday Mysteries. You can order those wherever you get books. And our Redbubble store has all sorts of fabulous art designed by Samantha Ellis and Terrence Hilt, featuring your favorite stars, including our popular Gene Kelly, Judy Garland, the pirate-themed Makoko mugs. You can find that at ticklishbiz.redbubble.com. So we're talking all about Clara Bow, thanks to Taylor Swift. I want to just get the elephant out of the room here. Are you guys Swifties?
David, I'll let you go first on that one.
Well, I am now.
Emily, did you punt that question because you are not a Swiftie?
How could you tell?
I do not endorse any and all angry emails to Emily saying, why do you not like Taylor Swift?
An active dislike. It's just more of a, hey, she's a thing that exists. You know, in the same way that I regard like Motorhead. It's like, oh, good for you. You're very famous for what you do.
I can't believe Motorhead and Taylor Swift got a shout out in the same sentence.
I aim to please.
Well, I mean, have you both listened to the Clara Bow song?
The moment it dropped, I think I had my first interview. It was a midnight here on the East Coast, and I think I had my first interview at 12:10 in the morning.
Oh my goodness.
Because there was such intense interest. It was the most famous artist in the world calling out to the most famous artist in the world a century earlier.
Clara Bow's Google rankings probably just shot through the ceiling the moment that album released. And there you were, available to seize the moment.
Even before it released, I was getting all sorts of people reaching out to me saying, what comment can you make? And I said, I can't make a comment on a song I haven't heard yet. So I delayed it all, but it was enormously meaningful and vindicating to me because when I was writing my book, nobody knew who she was. And I had to explain to people who she was. And I would say, I'm writing a biography of Clara Bow. And they would say, oh, America's Sweetheart. And I would say, no, that's Mary Pickford. And she had been so forgotten because her films were inaccessible. And to have her become familiar again, because I felt like the lone voice in the wilderness. I looked at her films and I thought, this is a great artist. This is someone who should be remembered for her work. Why is she forgotten? The men are all remembered. Valentino, Chaplin, Keaton, Lloyd, they're all remembered. And Louise Brooks at the time had a cult, but that was based on 2 films made in Europe. So there was no silent Hollywood star who had achieved the level of popularity she had, possibly Swanson, but even Swanson, it was more for Sunset Boulevard. And so to have Clara Bow, and when the book came out, it was a representation as well as a representation, but to have someone with such massive influence and such massive fan base shout out to someone who once had the same thing. It felt both appropriate and, like I said, vindicating.
It's more than a title of the song. The song itself is looking at comparisons and how Taylor Swift looks at herself. But what stands out to you about why do you think Taylor Swift name drops and uses Clara Bow in that song?
I think Clara Bow's problems as a public figure are virtually unrelatable to anyone except someone like Taylor Swift, because we can't understand that position to be the idol of the world and yet try and function as a human being and live a life as a human being when so much is projected on you, expected of you, demanded of you. So there's that. But I also think there's the box that artists are put in, especially female artists, where, like the song says, you are like someone else. And like the song implies, that means you're less than, because you're just like someone else. You're not your own person. And the song weaves a continuum. It starts with Clara Bow, but there's a bridge to Stevie Nicks, who had to struggle with that as well. Yeah. Lindsey Buckingham was the man. Stevie Nicks was just the girl and could only write about her relationship with the man in her songs. There's a minimization of women and there's a commodification of women. Hollywood was built on that. It's the only industry really that was built on that. Commodifying women, turning women into objects. I think the relatability for someone like Taylor Swift, that's just my guess, but it feels like something that would be appropriate, that she could relate to.
Clara Bow, Runnin Wild, your book, published in 1988. It was, for me, one of the first old Hollywood books I ever read about anybody, which was great. If memory serves, it seemed like it was hard to find for a while.
Well, it's been in print the entire time, but it certainly hasn't been as popular. It, again, been so gratifying because its popularity, if it was graphed, it just goes and goes and goes and goes and goes. It was niche before, and thanks to Taylor Swift, it's become more widespread. But so has Clara Bow, and her reputation has helped the book, obviously, because without that.
Take us back to the beginning. I mean, I know you mentioned that Clara Bow was really a forgotten figure, but what enticed you to want to spend X amount of your life researching her and ultimately writing a book about her?
Well, originally, it was a script. It was a script for Madonna, because Madonna's manager had proclaimed her the it girl of the 80s. And so I went to Madonna and pitched this idea of the it girl of the 80s playing the it girl of the 20s, which she loved. And if you saw Live Aid or see Live Aid, the footage, she has dyed her hair red. Once I started researching it, because there was nothing to base it on, there was no sort of underlying source material, or there was one biography, but it was not anything that I felt was appropriate or accurate. And so I started doing research, and I would interview these people who were in their 80s and their 90s and had lived through it. And they were just so fascinating, and none of their stories had ever been told. And the more I found out, the more I realized this really deserves to be a book, not only because of the content of the story, but because of the degree of her artistry. I felt like somebody needed to make that clear. And I did, like I said before, feel like the lone voice in the wilderness, because I didn't have anyone else to say, wasn't she great? You're right, she was that great. So sometimes I would question myself, but I always believed that what I was seeing was special. It was just so hard to see. So that's really what motivated the book. And my agents were furious at me because I was doing a lot of television at the time. I was doing well. And they said, why would you want to go write a book about a dead person that nobody remembers? My agent submitted it for publication to editors, and Jackie Onassis made a preemptive bid. That became this added layer of special experience, because it was very important to me to have an editor that would protect the material. Meaning, at that time, movie biographies were salacious, they were scurrilous, there was no standard. And my feeling was, and the way I pitched it, was to say, I want to write this book as if it were a military or a political or a religious figure, with that kind of research. And in that disreputable genre of movie biography, that didn't exist. So it was a different kind of book. And Barry Paris was doing Louise Brooks at the same time, and we really helped each other, because we were like a team, because the two of us had the same notion, which was, let's give this genre the same degree of seriousness as it deserves.
The film, unfortunately, never happened. Was there a specific reason it never came to fruition?
That was kind of my fault because I withdrew and said, I need to write this book first. And in the interim, she made Shanghai Surprise. She made Who's That Girl? And that happens all the time, as I'm sure you know, in LA, like big projects announced and then they don't happen for whatever reason. And by that point, the book had become something really important to me. I didn't think anyone would ever read it. I just thought it needed to be written.
I think what I love about Clara Bow, even before Taylor Swift decided to name drop her, is, and I've talked about this on the podcast before, I have a soft spot for the women that have been maligned historically, that we don't have anybody to speak for them. I love Lupe Velez. I love Veronica Lake, both of whom are notoriously listed as being difficult for various reasons. But Lupe and Clara Bow kind of hold the same infamy. Lupe Velez was written about in Hollywood Babylon as dying in her toilet bowl. Untrue, by the way.
Untrue.
And there is, of course, the story about Clara Bow and the USC football team that continues to endure to this day.
Despite the fact that I interviewed the members, the surviving members of the team. Yes. And more than the personal slurs, the fact that her work was inaccessible was really a crime to me, because the reason you want to read about these people is not just because of how they lived, but because of what they did, the legacy they left us, their films. Seeing a Clara Bow film when I was writing my book was almost impossible. I remember there was a collector, the only way to see the movie Man Trap, there was a collector who had a print in Los Angeles, and I dragged Madonna up to his house, and he made me pay him to show it on his kitchen wall. So we're sitting in his kitchen watching this movie. He does not know who it is. He knows who I am. He does not know who she is. And at some point during the movie, it must have been his neighbor or something, came over and peered his head around the door of the kitchen. And it was like a silent movie. He did a triple take because he went in, he looked, he went out again. He went in again, he went out again. And then he like craned his neck and ran out. And I could hear him stage whispering to this film collector, do you know who's in your kitchen? And that was the only way you could see these movies. So the fact that they're so accessible now and the fact that they're preserved, which became, my goal ever since that book was published. I've had this almost second vocation of ensuring that all of her films are found, preserved, and screened so that people can see them, because that's what matters. And that's what she would have wanted. That's what Taylor Swift would want. That's what Stevie Nicks would want. They're proud of the work they did. That's their legacy. That's their gift.
Can you talk a little bit for people that don't know about the rumor, where it started, and debunking it on your end?
Yes. And in the book, if you've read it, there's an entire chapter called Anatomy of a Rumor, because I had to autopsy this story, because when I was writing that book, if someone recognized the name Clara Bow, it was always tied into the USC football team. So the rumor originated with Hollywood Babylon, which was written in Paris and first published in Paris. And I actually met a man named Elliot Stein, who was a prominent film theorist and critic. But when he was a young, starving student in Paris, he was hired by Kenneth Anger to write Hollywood Babylon. And Kenneth Anger, he said to him, make it up. And so he did.
Gotta love that.
It was published at a time in the States in an expurgated version, because the European version was really extreme. It was so unusual to read those kinds of things about people that people assume they must be true, because they thought they would never dare print this unless it were true. So this legend about her became truth in the eyes of many people. It had reached a point by the time I was writing my book where her son, who was the district attorney of Las Vegas in his second term, landslide victory, would not speak about his mother publicly because he was so horrified by what he read everywhere about her. And it took me about 2 years to get him to talk. And once he trusted me, then he really trusted me. And he made the book what it could be. He gave me unrestricted access to her mental health records, her financial records, her legal records, her studio records, and as well as all of the material that she had saved and archived. It made me furious that this man could not be proud of his mother. And after the book came out, we did an event together and he got up to speak. And he was 6'5" without his cowboy boots, but he always wore custom cowboy boots. He even had custom black patent leather cowboy boots, and that made him 6'8". And he got up in front of this audience. He was a very intimidating guy, a cowboy. And he started to talk about his mother, and he started to cry. And he said, "I'm so proud of my mom." And I just thought to myself, if I did one thing right, it was this, to give him back his mother.
We've talked about Hollywood Babylon and just the atrocities that it's perpetuated on film history, that people don't do research, and if it's written in a book, it must be true. For me, I think what always irks me about the rumor, especially with regards to Clara Bow, is because, as your book says, she was a survivor of sexual assault. It's just the way we weaponize sex with old Hollywood stars is very frustrating.
Yes. And again, I would stress that we especially do it, or they especially did it with women. That they
definitely
turn so-called sex symbols into literal sex objects. And this person that was the most popular star in the nation becomes just the punchline of a Hollywood dirty joke. She's reduced to that. And I think that reduction, again, to go back to Taylor Swift and Stevie Nicks, the reduction of these women into somebody's girlfriend, somebody's whatever, rather than just their own power, their own achievement.
It's the perfect analogy to how we treat Taylor Swift and the lists that come out every single time she releases an album of who could this song be about? Which ex-boyfriend could this be? Let's rehash and dissect every single relationship she's ever had. Everything from kissing on up in a song has to be, who could this be? Who could the subject of this song actually be? We're just titillated and obsessed with the supposed realities of her romantic life. And of course, as we all know about Stevie Nicks and how people obsessed over her relationships in that band. And since then, no wonder she latched on to the two icons of creative works that she did in this particular song.
Yes, and there's this preoccupation with why aren't they married?
Yeah.
And even during her career, Clara Bow would give interviews saying, "I like my career. I think a woman should have a career if a woman wants a career." And there was this judgment of, well, to be really happy and fulfill yourself as a woman, you need to be married. You can have a career too, but you need to be married. And this fixation with her, like you said, Emily, she called them her fiancés, but she had 3 at a time. But it was really a euphemism for someone you were sleeping with. And I think that's what made her so objectionable to certain people, was this idea of a liberated woman who wasn't out there trumpeting it, was just living it.
Well, and two, we just talked about this when we did our episode on Mommy Dearest. Women actresses, especially, were required to be married and be mothers and be great at both. You can't be a divorcee. You have to be a fantastic mother, which the legacy of Mommy Dearest is showcasing. Look at how horrible Joan Crawford was as a parent. And yet Clara Bow married in 36, if memory serves.
31,
excuse me. I mean, she retired from acting pretty much when she got married. But I mean, can you talk a little bit about what was she like as a wife and mother during this time period where there's so much judgment?
Yeah, that's a great question, because when I was writing my book, I really felt that it was a sort of a feminist parable, because this person is triumphing over incredible odds, what she came from to what she achieved, and the fact that she could maintain this amazing career through scandal and through all sorts of problems she was enduring. But then as soon as she married, and she married a great guy, and she had 2 great kids, but that's when her mental health became an issue, because she was unfulfilled. She was an artist. She needed to have some sort of career. I mean, you see it even with Grace Kelly when she married, and she wasn't allowed, literally was not allowed to do the things she loved. And later in her life, when her children were older, she started traveling and reading poetry, and because she needed to fulfill that creative part of herself. And I think Clara Bow really started to slip when she couldn't do that. And with her background, the fact that she was a loving parent and the fact that both of her sons felt loved is a miracle, because she never had that. And there are beautiful letters from her to her kids, my boys, she called them, talking about what the people, the type of person she wants them to be, and the advantages she wants to give them that she never had, and how much she loves them. And when you think about what her own childhood was like with her mother and her father, who were both, you can't imagine people that would have made your life more traumatic. It's beyond Dickensian, but she was able to surmount that.
Her mother suffered from neurological issues because she fell out a window, right, when she was a teenager?
Yes, and that appears to have caused epilepsy, but there was mental illness in the family. Her own mother, her mother's mother, her maternal grandmother had died in a mental institution. And so there seems to have been some sort of genetic predisposition towards mental illness.
Her mother would held a knife to her throat in the middle of the night, and it's one of those, we talk about some of the hard childhoods, a lot of these, Barbara Stanwyck, Rita Hayworth, a lot of these women endured very traumatic childhoods in a time period where there's no therapy to process any of this trauma. You just have to kind of work through it. And yet, unlike Marilyn, well, I don't know. I mean, maybe David, I'm talking out of my hat. You can tell me if I'm wrong, but I feel like unlike Marilyn Monroe, where everybody now has an opinion about, like, was she mentally ill, or at what point did the mental illness start? There still seems like a lot of ambiguity. Clara Bow didn't really have those issues until she gave up acting.
I don't know. It's sort of, I believe, what I was saying before, which is, and I think this is true about every person you just name checked, the work allows you to express your pain in a constructive, creative way. You know, there's that expression, show me a creative person and I'll show you an unhappy childhood. These were deeply traumatized people who, through their art, were able to express a lot of their pain. And when you take that art away, where does the pain go? It's still there. And so I think, in a way, paradoxically, her career was therapeutic almost. And it's when the career ends. I think that's why Barbara Stanwyck could not stop working. You know, Rita Hayworth too, they all wanted to work as long as they could, even if they didn't have to, because the work obviously helped them in many ways, like any creative person's work does.
It is very difficult, even for me as a modern woman living in 2024, to understand that even if you married, air quotes, like a good one, you still legally became your husband's property when you married in those times. And so I feel like there must have been a disconnect or like a real upheaval that might have happened when someone goes from being a star, an independent person who is allowed to have their own life and they have their own agency and they have power, to essentially being a wife, being a pawn or property of someone, and giving up the privileges and the power and the autonomy of being an actor, an actress, and now suddenly not having literal legal autonomy at the time.
Have you joined Ticklish Biz's Patreon yet? You should, just like Allie Moore, Amy Hart, Danny, David Floyd, Donna Hill, Gates, Jacob Haller, Jonathan Watkins, Krista Painter, McF, and Rachel Clark. Listen to episodes 48 hours early, watch exclusive video interviews, receive merch, and even guest on an episode. You also get access to bonus series like Based on a True Podcast, double features, and our latest series, But Have You Read? The Series. It all starts at just $1 at patreon.com/ticklishbiz. Back to the show.
Oh, I think in Clara Bow's case, that's so true, because here's someone who grew up in the slums of Brooklyn at a time when the population density there exceeded what was then called Calcutta, this, hive of people, who then goes to a 350,000 acre ranch in the middle of nowhere. So not only is she no longer working in terms of a career, there are no PTA meetings. There's no community. There's nowhere to express. She's not doing amateur acting. There's nothing. So you're taking something away from someone completely and expecting them to adapt to it. But that wasn't what she wanted. She wanted to be a good mother. She loved her kids, but she was just tired of Hollywood. But there could have been other careers, or there could have been more of the same. She would have been a fantastic Belle Watling in Gone with the Wind. I mean, there's so many roles that she could have done as a character actress beyond. I mean, if you think of someone like Lucille Ball, she languished until she was 40 before I Love Lucy.
And one of the things that I remember when Babylon came out last year, unfortunately. We have not talked about Babylon. Maybe we will one day. if I feel angry enough. But I know that the big thing last year when that movie was coming out was that Margot Robbie's character is based on Clara Bow. I think they backpedaled a little bit and said afterwards it was like an amalgamation of different characters, but the emphasis was is the character was based on Clara Bow. And in the presentation in the movie is that she's this kind of white trash, strong Brooklyn accent with terrible table manners who like wipes her hands on her clothes and whatnot. Did you see Babylon, David? What do you think about? I've read sources that have said Clara Bow definitely was bohemian, that she didn't have the best manners. But I mean, how do you look at boiling her character down in a movie to that?
Hollywood at the time, these are people who were old enough to remember when the Hollywood hotels had signs saying no dogs are actors. And this was not theatrical acting. This was screen acting, which was considered sort of scraping the bottom of the barrel. And so what they did in reaction to that was create their own society. Some of them went outside the community, like Gloria Swanson, Mae Murray. They married fake noblemen. I mean, they had a title, but they had no money. But most of them tried to create an internal society where there was a hierarchy. And here comes Clara Bow saying, no, I don't believe in that. No, I like to wear what I want to wear. If I want to wear a belted bathing suit into the Beverly Hills Hotel, what's wrong with that? If I want to tell a dirty joke, what's wrong with that? If I want to play craps for a penny a point with my cook, maid, and chauffeur, what's wrong with that? And it scandalized and horrified all of these pretentious people because it unveiled all of their pretension. People would say, and I'm quoting Louise Brooks here, this isn't even me, but people would say, oh, she's from Brooklyn. Well, so is Marion Davies. So was Norma Talmadge. A lot of them were from Brooklyn, but somehow with Clara Bow, she became the victim of all of that because she did not know how to play that game and wasn't interested in playing that game. She just wanted to be authentic. And I think that was the key to her appeal, why she appealed to men as much as women for different reasons. But that's what made her such a star. She never changed. She didn't buy this huge mansion in Beverly Hills. She bought a little bungalow. She roller skated to work. She did things that were considered déclassé. And that was unforgivable in that world. Colleen Moore told me she was at a party with Clara Bow. Clara Bow told an off-color joke and just scandalized the room. Now, these were people that were hardly upper-class, blue-blooded people, but they wanted to be. They needed to be.
How did she transition to talkies? Of course, we all know, everybody's heard the stories about those who could not transition. She made, as you said, I think 11 talkies in her career. How did she weather that transition?
Well, she didn't weather it well because it was traumatic. You're a, Super Bowl quarterback, and all of a sudden someone says in 2 weeks you're playing in the Stanley Cup. Go. Because the art of pantomime, the art of expressing emotion without words, which she had mastered, suddenly became irrelevant. And the instrument of your voice, which was a very theatrical process, became necessary. And you had the studio looking at its stars and saying, these are expensive properties. We can get cheaper talent if we import it from the theatrical stage, Broadway, and bring it out here. So it was a sort of confluence of events. Paramount gave Clara Bow 2 weeks to prepare for her first talkie. MGM gave Garbo almost 2 years. So she wasn't ready. She wasn't equipped. The technology was still primitive. And she was afraid of the mic. She had a stammer when she got nervous. She had a Brooklyn accent, all things that were considered absolutely unacceptable, even though they suited the character she played. But if you look at those early talkies with the theater, the way they talk, which sounds completely unnatural versus her own speaking voice. So it didn't take her long to adjust to it, but she never enjoyed it. The love of the work had left. It became a different kind of discipline, and it really didn't suit her because part of her skill and appeal was you never know where she's going to end up on the set. In silent films, the cameraman would say, just tell me where you're going and I'll follow you, because she was so spontaneous. If you see it, all of those adorable moments when she's got that toy stuffed dog and she lifts up its tail and pats its rear end, that's all improvised. And that was her talent, her gift. So to take that away, it felt like sometimes in the talkies, especially the early ones, she feels like a caged animal that just wants to be set free.
You mentioned her possibly having a second career had she come back and doing character work. Can you talk a little bit more about the roles that you think she could have played had she worked longer into the 30s and 40s?
Well, it was ironic because that slangy Brooklyn kind of dame, so popular in Pre-Code and then carried on with all of these movies, she could have done all of that. She was actually really perfect for that. And then she could have been on television. She could have had a series. She could have been Lucy. She had all that ability. And so really, she could have done pretty much what she wanted in terms of, as she aged out, the roles would have been different. But if you look at Joan Crawford, who was able to shift and change according to the times, she could have done the same thing.
Did Clara Bow keep getting offers once she left Hollywood, or did they dry up?
Oh, she did. But then finally people gave up. I mean, normally when a huge star says, I'm retiring, people say, sure you are. And at first they were offering her a lot, but as the years passed, it became pretty clear she's serious. She really doesn't want to come back. And she didn't.
We've seen it girls come and go since Clara Bow. Your Marilyn Monroe's, Mamie Van Doren's, your Jean Harlow, who you also wrote a book about, which is also equally fantastic. But it all goes back to Clara. I mean, I was going to say, has anybody replicated Clara Bow since that time? Were any of those comparisons really apt?
The term it, has done a 180 in terms of its meaning, because today it means of the moment, the it handbag, the it restaurant. Back then, it was unique. And that's part of what made an it girl was she had a quality that couldn't be explained. It was sex appeal, but it transcended sex appeal, and no one else had it. So it was a uniqueness, and that's why it was applied to Clara Bow. So the It Girl title really was what made her special. I think Jean Harlow was special in a different way. Marilyn Monroe was special in a different way. But Harlow and Monroe both vocally would talk about Clara Bow and her influence on them because they had a predecessor. Clara Bow didn't break the mold. There was no mold. Before that, sex was a foreign concept. You had a vamp like Theda Bara, Nita Naldi. It was not a domesticated. Clara Bow brought sex into America's backyard. She was a healthy American girl with a healthy sexual appetite. Her films, the titles, Man Trap, Get Your Man. It was all about this idea of women taking charge of themselves, their life, their career, their sexuality. She flipped the rituals of courtship. Women used to have to wait for a man to approach. Clara Bow didn't wait. And there's that great, intertitle in It, where she sees Antonio Moreno for the first time and she says, "Sweet Santa Claus, give me him." But then she doesn't wait for Christmas. She goes right after him and she gets him, but she doesn't get him by changing. She gets him by being herself, and he falls in love with her. And it's hard to convey today what an impact that made on her generation in the 1920s, because they had been raised by Victorian mothers who told them, no, 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 you have to be this. And Clara Bow was saying, no, you have to be yourself. And if you're yourself, you'll get what you want. And that changed everything. To this day, it's changed everything.
I think that's fascinating. You bring up the Victorian mothers who raised this generation of girls. And I think it's so interesting that one of the number one words that I see used to describe Clara Bow is tomboy. And so to think of her as someone who was often sporty or athletic or even downright androgynous with the way that she wore her hair and things like that, and how much of a almost catastrophic thing that must have been for people to see on screen.
In what way?
Blowing their minds in their way of how femininity works, or what is the definition of femininity in order to fulfill the roles of femininity in society.
That's a really good point, because it's almost as if the role of femininity, the description of it, the definition of it, was made by a man. And this is what is feminine. And she said, no, this is what is feminine. And she could be both. And again, that's why she appealed to women and men. And I think that was something, I'm not sure anyone else has done it quite the same way. I mean, Marilyn Monroe certainly had that dual appeal, but a lot of it was based on her fragility and her vulnerability, which is a very different sort of appeal. You really want to help Marilyn Monroe. You want to save her. You want to comfort her. There's pain. It's so clear. Whereas with Clara Bow, you were like, I just want to know you. You're awesome. You can do whatever you want. And this idea of turning a Cinderella story, because that's kind of what her formula films all were, was she was the kid from Brooklyn. I mean, the movie It plays as if it could have been her life if she hadn't left Brooklyn and hadn't gone to Hollywood. She would have been the kind of plucky, lucky girl who works in a big department store and sees the son of the store's owner and says, "Sweet Santa Claus, give me him." And she gets him. She gets her man. And so I think that definition of what is femininity, well, can't femininity just be whatever a woman needs it to be rather than what a man tells her it should be?
Exactly.
But I think that was also really threatening.
Definitely. I think it still very much is. I think that it's also, and you can tell me if there's more to it than this, I also think it's why, to go back to the beginning of this, that this started with the script, it's why I think we have Clara Bow-esque figures in old Hollywood biopics, but we haven't had a Clara Bow biopic, because I feel like there is still this lack of knowledge about how to accurately put her in that Hollywood mold.
True. And I also think that until women run Hollywood, there will be more films about men, because men just aren't interested in women's stories. When I say men, I mean executives aren't interested in women's stories the way they are in men's, because you do see movies that are biopics about men, and you see many, far fewer that are about women.
Yep.
Who, by the way, are infinitely more interesting.
You were literally preaching the words that I've said about the old Hollywood biopic genre. That being said, I mean, if they waved a wand and wanted to create a Clara Bow biopic tomorrow, is there an actress today that you think could play her?
It's really hard to do to an actor to say, be someone else. I think the best ones I've ever seen in terms of performances are when they don't do the person, they create a character that is based on that person, but they also bring their own individuality to it. I think it's so dangerous to say, be that other person, because there's no comparison. You can't do it. The reason why these people do live on, the reason why we're talking about Clara Bow today, 100 years literally after she was in the movies, is because she was so unique. So get a person who doesn't, like Diana Ross in Lady Sings the Blues. She doesn't sing like Billie Holiday. She doesn't act like Billie Holiday, but she creates a character that's so fantastic that she makes the movie work. And she sings those songs, not like a Supreme, not like Billie Holiday, but like that character does. And to me, those are always the best biopics, because you're not in your head saying, oh, wait, Billie Holiday didn't do that. It becomes a character who's called Billie Holiday, and it's the story of her life, but it becomes the vehicle for the performer who's doing it.
That makes sense. I still would love to have seen Madonna do it. Not gonna lie. Kind of wishing it happened. Well, I mean, to close this out, it's a standard question, but I gotta ask it of you, David. If somebody wants to do a look into the essential Clara Bow films, what are the movies you recommend and why?
Well, first of all, I have to qualify that by saying I am only going to recommend films that survive, because all four of Clara Bow's films from 1928, the height of her silent film stardom, are lost, which is really irreparable. I mean, imagine Marilyn Monroe's career and we couldn't see Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, How to Marry a Millionaire, Bus Stop, and 7-Year Itch.
Ugh.
And you'd evaluate the career without those films. So that said, The Plastic Age, which is the quintessential jazz age college story where she plays a flapper gone wild. Man Trap by Victor Fleming, who is known as a man's man director, but really pulled fantastic performances out of so many actresses. Clara Bow, Jean Harlow, Lana Turner, Ingrid Bergman. Wings is epic. It won the first Oscar for Best Picture. She's not, she's the female star, but it's really not her movie. And then for the sound films, I would say definitely Call Her Savage, because it's just a pre-code gone wild. I love Hoopla, the last film she made. I think she's great in it, and I think it's got that carny life down. There's two other films I really like that are very hard to see. One is called Dangerous Curves, where she plays a circus aerialist. She's great in it, and it's her actual Brooklyn accent where she doesn't have to pretend. And then another one called The Saturday Night Kid, where she works in a store and Jean Arthur is her sister, and Jean Harlow has a bit part. So you're almost seeing the passing of the torch in progress. But pretty much any movie Clara Bow made is worth seeing because of Clara Bow. She made a lot of bad films, but she's never bad.
I do also have to ask just a completely petty question, because she made, I think, The Wild Party with Friedrich March. And if you've listened to this podcast long term, we all know that I don't like Friedrich March because he was mean to Veronica Lake. So I have to ask, I mean, did she have a favorite and least favorite co-star in her career?
You know, she was very frustrated by the fact that her co-stars were invariably people on their way up or down, because Paramount internally, she was so commercial and people would go to see her in anything. So Paramount did not want to waste a major actor in a Clara Bow film, which is why, for example, you said The Wild Party, Frederick March, it's early Frederick March, because once Frederick March became a star, and the same thing with Gary Cooper. So her co-stars, I mean, she loved Gilbert Roland and he's in Call Her Savage, but that was an old relationship. But in general, her co-stars are pretty forgettable. If I said the names, people would probably scratch their heads. Reed Howes, Lane Chandler, Stanley Smith. These are not names that have survived.
Although you named both Friedrich March and Gary Cooper, again, both actors that I have long-standing issues with because of how they treated other women in their life. So we're just going to end that on a petty note where I'm just reminding everybody that I think they might be just a smidge of a trash human. Do not at me. Send Emily all the Taylor Swift emails instead. But David, oh my gosh, thank you so much for taking time to chat with us. I heartily endorse Clara Bow, Running Wild, as well as Bombshell, The Life and Death of Jean Harlow, which is your other book. Those are two huge biographies. I mean, I think any writer could retire on those two alone. But I mean, do you want to write another biography in future?
I might. I never know. You know, I'm always researching things, because for every one that sticks, you probably do 20 that for whatever reason don't. I've got some I've been working on for a long time, but I can't find the smoking gun. I have other ideas. I'm always doing something. I wrote something about Patricia Douglas, and that became the documentary Girl 27 after it was published in Vanity Fair. And that is personally very important to me because of that story, and really ties into what you've been saying about the mistreatment of women in Hollywood. So I'm always interested in this, and I've just started an Instagram account at Real David Stenn where I'm sharing my archive with everyone, because it's been collecting, and I thought, why is it just sitting here? There's so much stuff in here that was never published or seen. And so that's been so far a lot of fun, and I keep saving these films. That's my job. I consider it absolutely. We just found a lost Clara Bow short film when she was 17 from Brooklyn in a parking lot in Omaha. So miracles still happen. And those 4 lost 1928 films I mentioned before, I see them as lost at the moment. And I'll do this for the rest of my life. I will look for them in everywhere they can possibly be, and never give up.
I heartily recommend following David on Instagram. I always see something very cool that you publish. I go down the rabbit hole on that every now and then. So it's worth just following everything David does, because he is the coolest. But David, we thank you for joining us on the show.
Much.
Feel free to let people know outside of Instagram where you are online and any events you have upcoming.
Yes. Well, the next one is the AFI, American Film Institute, the AFI Silver Classic in Washington, D.C., which is having a pre-code festival the weekend of June 13th, where all sorts of fantastic films, and I mean film on film, will be shown, including Hoopla from an original Studio Nitrate Vault print that was restored by the Museum of Modern Art, and some other great titles. I have a link in my bio about how to get tickets, and I'm always doing things. So if you check my feed, I'm always talking about where I am and what I'm standing up and talking about.
That is going to close out this edition of Ticklish Business for today. You can listen to us wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Reviews matter, so please leave us one on Apple Podcast of 5 stars. You can always listen to any episode going back all the way to episode 1 over at ticklishbusiness.podbean.com. Our archive remains free all the time. So head on over there if you want to catch up on any of our previous shows. You can follow the podcast on all social media on Twitter at ticklish_biz and Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at ticklishbiz. Shout out to our videographer, Jenny Hawkins, who does our great vids every week, which you can see on our social media. She most recently turned in a really great one that I did of Greystone Manor. She turned that into a beautiful little short film. You should definitely go over and look at it. You can follow me on all social media at Kristen Lopez88, and my official website is KristenKLopez.com. Emily Edwards, where are you online?
I am everywhere on every site at Ms. Emily Edwards and at MsEmilyEdwards.com.
And remember that our Patreon helps keep the lights on at Ticklish Biz HQ and gives us chances to do new content like that Mommy Dearest episode, as well as our various YouTube videos and bonus shows that we have. So consider helping us starting at just $1 at patreon.com/ticklishbiz. You can be added into our show notes. You get a shout out in the mid-roll that you just heard. All sorts of fun things. And don't forget that we have books out. We are authors. We are working on new books right now. You can order those wherever you buy books. We will be returning on June 12th with a look at LA Noir in honor of the 50th anniversary of Chinatown. Till then.